Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I apologize for the delay. I had some technical difficulties. Let's begin, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Let's make our intentions for the sake of Allah. We'll carry on from where we left off last time, and that was explaining the attributes of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So these, before we begin, these are 13 attributes, 13 things that we say about Allah that we must attribute to Allah. Otherwise, we would not be considered to be believing in the Godhood of Allah. You can say that Allah is God because he is attributed with these 13 attributes. The meaning of God is to be attributed with these 13 attributes. So anybody who denies Allah being attributed with any one of these attributes is saying that Allah is not God. Okay? Likewise, someone who doubts, is Allah attributed with one of the 13 that I'm going to mention or not? Then he's actually saying, I'm doubting about whether Allah is God. Okay? So such a person would not be considered to be a Muslim because he's either denying that Allah is God or he is doubting about Allah being God. So the scholars said that it's a personal obligation to know uh, these 13 attributes of Allah. The obligation of knowing doesn't mean that a person has to memorize them word for word, but at least to recognize them, to know about them, i.e., when they are mentioned to a person, then a person recognizes them. Yes, as these are the attributes of Allah, tabaraka wa ta'ala. So, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. When we say La ilaha illallah, it means no one is attributed with these 13 attributes but Allah. Okay? So through that you see that they are part of the core meaning of the first testification of faith. La ilaha illallah. Okay? So the author said, فيتلخص من معنى ما مضى إثبات 13 صفة لله تعالى. In summary of what has already been mentioned, we confirm 13 attributes to Allah. تكرر ذكرها في القرآن. They were repeatedly mentioned in the Quran. إما لفظا, either explicitly they were mentioned as Allah is attributed with such and such attribute and such attribute. The words were mentioned. وإما معنى, or by meaning they were mentioned. كثيرا, a lot. And they are, so the author is going to list them now. وهي الوجود والوحدانية والقدم أي الأزلية والبقاء وقيامه بنفسه والقدرة والإرادة والعلم والسمع والبصر والحياة والكلام والمخالفة للحوادث. We'll discuss them soon, inshallah. The author said, الشرح أن هذه الصفات 13 الواجبة لله تجب معرفتها على كل مكلف. Explanation. These 13 attributes that Allah is necessarily attributed with, right? Every accountable person has to know them. When we say Allah is necessarily attributed with these attributes, it means the mind, the intellect, does not accept that Allah would not be attributed with them. The mind judges it as a must intellectually, that God must be attributed with these 13 attributes. Okay? And every accountable person must know them. So everyone who is sane so not insane. Pubescent, so not non-pubescent. Sane, pubescent, and has heard the call to al-Islam. They've heard this statement that no one deserves to be worshipped except God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Whether he hears that statement in a language they understand is considered to have heard the call to al-Islam. So, البالغ العاقل الذي بلغته دعوة الإسلام, the sane one, pubescent two, person who has heard the call to al-Islam needs to know about these attributes, is obligated to know about these attributes. Okay? So, ولا يجب عليه حفظ ألفاظها. It's not an obligation upon a person to learn the exact terms, the words. Okay? بل الواجب اعتقاد معانيها. What is an obligation, so a person isn't sinful, is to believe in their meanings. ويتلخص من معنى ما مضى إثبات هذه الصفات الثلاث عشرة لله تعالى، وقد تكرر ذكرها إما باللفظ الظاهر وإما بالمعنى الوارد في النصوص، أي في القرآن والحديث. So like we said in the summary above, these 13 attributes, they've been mentioned again and again in the Quran, either explicitly, like for example, it is mentioned Allah is Al-Qadir. He is the powerful, so he has power. Either it's been mentioned explicitly like that, or it's been mentioned in meaning in the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, let's start with the attributes. The author said the first attribute, al-wujud, أي أن الله تعالى موجود. The first attribute is existence. Okay, so we'll look at all the attributes and we'll mention their opposites. So the opposites, it is intellectually impossible that they would be attributed to Allah. And also remember that the opposites of these attributes, they are considered insults to Allah. Okay, so here you have al-wujud, right? Existence. Its opposite is what? Non-existence. Attributing non-existence to Allah, this is an intellectual impossibility. It cannot happen. It will never be that Allah is non-existent. And for someone to say Allah doesn't exist, or for someone to doubt, does Allah exist or not, right? This is an insult to Allah. And whoever insults Allah is not considered a believer. So we'll mention that with every attribute, the opposite. So Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala exists. Okay? The author said, قال الله تعالى أفي الله شك. Meaning, is there any doubt about the existence of Allah? This is what this ayah says. Is there any doubt about the existence of Allah? Meaning, of course, there is no doubt about the existence of Allah. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره رواه البخاري وغيره. And the proof from the hadith that Allah exists is that the Prophet mentioned عليه الصلاة والسلام كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره. Allah existed and nothing else, nothing other than Allah existed. Then after that, of course, Allah created the universe and the things in it. This was narrated by Al-Bukhari and others. So to digress slightly here, the intellect is used to prove the existence of God. The intellect, the sound mind, rational thinking is used to prove the existence of a creator. Even if a person doesn't know that the creator is called God or Allah, the sound mind bears witness to there being a creator. And this has been made clear by the way, by the nature of creation. So we are created, right? We change from one state to another, from angry to tranquil, from happy to sad, hungry to satiated, thirsty to quenched. We change. Okay, that's one thing. Change. We also have a beginning. The creations have a beginning. Trees, they have a beginning. Okay, water has a beginning, and so on. So Allah created the universe, and it has these characteristics of being in need. Having a beginning means that it's in need of the one that gave it that beginning. Simple. And also, changing from one state to another tells us that it is in need of the one that changed it, if you will, the changer, right? And that is Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So intellectually, it is absolutely necessary that a creator exists because the scholars proved that the false theory of infinite regression, like to say that things have always existed infinitely without a beginning, this leads to an impossibility. This is like saying that that first domino was never flicked. If that first domino was never flicked, then how would we, being the last domino, ever have toppled over? It doesn't make sense. So the universe has a beginning, okay, and its creator is Allah, who created with His eternal power, and He is the one that eternally willed for it to occur. So that's the so-called Big Bang disproved, because what's claimed about the Big Bang is that it is a random explosion that occurred, bringing about all of this variation and all these complexities and meticulous creations. And by the way, just to note, this theory, this false theory of the Big Bang, it hasn't been around for long. It was introduced in 1923, and then it was expanded upon in 1929. So barely it's been around for 100 years. Barely. So this was something introduced by a Russian mathematician, and then it was expanded upon by a French researcher. So this is something that the West has brought about to try to explain what they believe is the beginning of the universe. Anyway, that's just a side note. So the existence of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, it is proven by everything in the creation actually. Everything that has a shape or a size or a color or a texture or changes from state to state, all of this proves that a creator exists, because changing from one state to another or being a certain shape or a certain size or a certain texture of color requires one who created it like that. Like the sun, for example, why is it circular, or why do we see it as circular? Why is it a yellowy color? Why does it give off heat? As opposed to being triangular, being green, and giving off uh, coldness. Where did this specificity come from? Did it choose for itself to be circular, yellow, and give off heat? No, it did not. So these attributes, they require for one to have given it them to the sun. And this we say is Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, who eternally willed for everything in the creation to be as it is. So the scholars said everything in the creation is a sign for the existence of a creator. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala exists. The second attribute, Al-Wahdaniyah, أي أنه واحد لا شريك له. قال الله تعالى: لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. أي لو كان لهما أي للسماوات والأرض آلهة غير الله لفسدتا. So Allah is attributed with al-wahdaniyah. You could say oneness. You could also say Allah is attributed with uniqueness because there's nothing like him. There's nothing like Allah in his reality. There's nothing like Allah in terms of his attributes. And no one can create, i.e., bring from non existence into existence except Allah. So Allah is unique. Allah, it says here, Allah is one without a sharik, without a partner. Allah doesn't share his attributes with the creation. And the creations do not share their with Allah. So Allah is unique. This is the meaning of Allah is one. This is the meaning of the oneness of Allah, meaning the uniqueness of Allah, because there's nothing like him. Allah revealed, had there been for the skies and the earth supposed gods other than Allah, then the skies and the earth, they would not run properly. There would be chaos. They would not run properly. Why? Because this, for there to be more than one God, is an intellectual impossibility. It can never be. It is inherently a contradiction. Okay? So there's no such thing as there being more than one God. Allah is attributed with al-qidam, which means being without a beginning. The author said, وَالْقِدَمْ أي أنه لا ابتداء لوجوده قال الله تعالى هو الأول والآخر. Allah is attributed with al-qidam, with a kasra under the qaf, al-qidam, not al-qadam. We're not saying here al-qadam, saying al-qidam, i.e., the one whose existence is without a beginning. Take this as a rule. Everything that is other than Allah exists with a beginning. So everything, trees and seas and birds and fish and plants and people and jinn and the animals and the sky, the stars and everything, volcanoes and lava and forests and everything, the universe, the creation, it has a beginning. It started at some point. Why? Because Allah created it. Okay? As for Allah, Allah and the attributes of Allah, they do not have a beginning. Allah does not have a beginning to his existence. Because had it been said that he had a beginning, then he would have been in need of the one that supposedly gave him that beginning. So Allah is attributed with eternity. Here, eternity means without a beginning. The word eternity in the English language has two meanings. One is more prevalent than the other. We usually use the word eternity to mean forever without an end, right? But in English, you can use the word eternity to mean without a beginning also. So we're going to use the word eternity here to mean Allah is without a beginning. The reason we're using the word eternity here is because the next attribute is al-baqa, everlastingness. Okay, Allah revealed huwa al-awwalu wal-akhir. Okay, this, it doesn't mean Allah is the first and the last. No. It means Allah is the one without a beginning and Allah is the one without an end. He is eternal, without a beginning, and everlasting, i.e. without an end. So the next attribute is al-baqa. والبقاء أي أنه لا نهاية لوجوده لا يموت ولا يهلك ولا يتغير. قال الله تعالى وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ أي ذَاتُهُ. Allah is attributed with everlastingness, i.e., that there is no end to his existence. Allah does not stop existing. Allah does not die. Allah is not annihilated. Allah does not change. Allah revealed, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, meaning the self of Allah remains. The self of Allah is everlasting. In other words, Allah, his self, meaning the reality of Allah, meaning Allah, Allah will exist forever. Okay? وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ. Wajh here, it is not permissible to translate it as face. We don't say Allah has a face or hands or eyes and so on and so forth. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, it means وَيَبْقَى ذَاتُ رَبِّكَ, the self of your Lord, meaning Allah himself. Allah is everlasting. The next attribute is, as the author said, وَالْقِيَامُ بِالنَّفْسِ, أي أنه مستغن عن كل ما سواه وكل ما سواه محتاج إليه، فالعالم لا يستغني عن الله طرفة عين. قال الله تعالى فإن الله غني عن العالمين. والقيام بالنفس means that Allah is not in need of the creation, i.e., Allah is not in need of anything that is other than Him, of course. All the creation is other than Allah. Allah is not in need of any of the creation. And everything that is other than Allah is in need of Allah. So the universe, it is always in need of Allah. The universe cannot do without Allah even for the blink of an eye. It shows you the extent to which the creation is in need of Allah. Allah revealed, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ عَنِ الْعَالَمِينَ. Indeed, Allah is not in need of the creation. The next attribute is Al-Qudra. The author said, وَالْقُدْرَةِ فَاللَّهُ قَادِرٌ قادر على كل شيء أي كل ممكن عقلي، وهو ما يجوز عقلا وجوده وعدمه. فالقدرة صفة أزلية لله تعالى بها يوجد ويعدم، والله لا يعجزه شيء. قال الله تعالى وهو على كل شيء قدير. والقدرة, power. Allah is attributed with power. So Allah is powerful over everything. When we say Allah has power over everything, it means just that. Of course, it means everything that can exist. Everything that can come into existence, Allah has power over that. Anything that can come into existence and go out of existence, yes, of course, Allah has power over that. And that is everything. That is everything that can exist. So Allah has power over everything. So the power of Allah is an eternal attribute of Allah by which He brings into existence and takes out of existence. So with His power, Allah creates. And with His power, Allah destroys, annihilates, stops things existing. And nothing renders Allah unable. Allah is not attributed with weakness or inability. Allah revealed, Allah has power over everything. Al-irada. will. The author said, والإرادة أي المشيئة وهي تخصيص الممكن العقلي ببعض ما يجوز عليه من الصفات دون بعض وبوقت دون آخر. قال الله تعالى: وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين. The author said will. This is another attribute that a person must know. The will of Allah. Meaning Allah created the universe by his eternal will, meaning he wasn't forced. It wasn't the case, supposedly, that there were some sort of conditions that were a certain way, and then just just by the motion of those conditions, things came into existence without Allah eternally willing for them to come into existence. No. Allah is attributed with will, meaning Allah eternally chose that certain things would come into existence and was not forced. To say otherwise, to say that Allah didn't eternally choose or Allah didn't eternally will, this would mean that the things that came into existence, Allah was forced to create them. And this is kufr. This is blasphemy for someone to say that. So, Allah is attributed with will. What is the meaning? What is the definition of the will of Allah? What is its function? It is by His will that Allah specifies certain intellectual possibilities, specifies them with existence over non-existence, at one time over another time, and with one attribute over another attribute. Let me give you a practical example. The function of the eternal will of Allah. Someone was to ask, what does Allah do with His will? Just as someone was to say, what does Allah do with the attribute of sight? Allah sees. What does Allah do with the attribute of power? Allah creates. What does Allah do with the attribute of hearing? Allah hears. Okay, what does Allah do with the attribute of will? Allah eternally specifies certain things to exist at certain times over not existing. Like Allah eternally willed for something to exist at 4 p.m. over existing at 3 p.m. Allah eternally willed that it would exist, that it would be, for example, rough instead of being soft. Okay, this specificity, this is due to the eternal will of Allah. Okay, Allah revealed. So if I just translate, Allah, the will of Allah is that Allah specifies the intellectual possibilities with some attributes that are permissible to be attributed to them over others at one time over another. Allah revealed what means you do not will except if Allah willed for you to will. So we don't do things unless Allah eternally willed that we would do those things. So our will even is under the will of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. La ilaha illallah illallahu Muhammadur Rasulullah. We are currently going over the first shahada, La ilaha illallah. The 13 attributes, they come under the core meaning of La ilaha illallah. Muhammadur Rasulullah, the second shahada, we're going to go over that in a little bit, inshallah, in the next session, inshallah. So, the next attribute of Allah Ta'ala that we're going to talk about is al-ilm. يقول المصنف والعلم أي أن الله يعلم كل شيء بعلمه الأزلي. That Allah knows absolutely everything with His eternal knowledge. ولا يتجدد له علم لأن علمه علم واحد شامل لكل المعلومات يعلم به سبحانه ذاته وصفاته وما يحدثه من مخلوقاته يعلم ما كان وما يكون وما لا يكون أن لو كان كيف يكون قال الله تعالى وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is not attributed with attaining or acquiring or gaining additional knowledge. Allah, His knowledge is one knowledge by which He knows everything. Allah doesn't learn new things. Allah's knowledge doesn't increase or decrease. Allah doesn't forget or remember after having forgotten. No, this is our knowledge. This is how we are. We learn things that are new. We forget things. Okay? Our knowledge increases and decreases. The knowledge of Allah is an attribute of perfection. Without a beginning, without an end, Allah knows everything. Allah knows about Himself. Allah knows His attributes. Allah knows what He creates. Allah knows what was in the past, what is now, and what will be in the future, and what will not be. And Allah knows that if it was to be, then He knows how it would be. We cannot whatever we imagine in our minds, Allah is not like that. Allah is unimaginable. His knowledge is unimaginable. Tabaraka wa ta'ala. The author said, and the opposite of this attribute, I forgot to mention the attribute, the opposites. The opposite of this attribute is ignorance. So one cannot attribute ignorance to Allah, Tabaraka wa ta'ala. The author said, وَالسَّمْعُ وَالْبَصَرُ أي أن الله يسمع بسمعه الأزلي الذي ليس كسمع غيره ويرى برؤيته التي ليست كرؤية غيره قال الله تعالى وهو السميع البصير. Allah is attributed with hearing and seeing, i.e. that Allah hears and sees, that Allah hears with His eternal hearing. That is not like our hearing. How do we hear the creation? Look how fascinating this is. Had Allah willed, right, Allah could have made it be that we heard things with our noses, or with our toes, or with our shoulders. But Allah eternally willed that we would have an instrument known as the ear, which, when certain sound waves and vibrations strike it, there is something in this instrument known as the eardrum to us that vibrates, and there are signals that go to and from the brain, and then we hear sounds. That is how Allah created hearing for us. It is possible that a person could hear even without an ear. It's possible. But Allah created it this way. Now, this is how we hear. We require tools and instruments. We require ears. We require sound waves to hit those ears or something inside the ears. And that's how we hear. The hearing of Allah is without an ear, without a need for sound waves. Allah hears everything that exists. وَيَرَى بِرُؤْيَتِهِ الَّتِي لَيْسَتْ كَرُؤْيَةِ غَيْرِهِ. And Allah sees. How do we see? We see with eyes. Some of us not so well as perhaps others. Some of us need correction lenses. Some of us have glasses. Some of us have contact lenses. How do we see? The whole the light rays, when they hit a part of the eye, there is a lot of there's a lot that goes on, and through light rays and the instruments that our eyes we see. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala created this to be the norm for us. Had it been the case that Allah had willed for us to see with our ears, then that would have been so. Look at this. Don't you dream? Okay. Do you dream with your eyes? Your eyes are usually closed when you are asleep, but you see, right? When you think, when you imagine something, when you imagine that place where you're so relaxed, or when you imagine a memory, when you think of a memory, a good memory, you see it in your mind, you see it in your heart, but you don't have eyes in your heart. How is that? So, even in the creation, there are types of sight that exist that do not require eyes. If we go back to the ears, okay, uh, there are types of hearing even in the creation that exist that are without ears. Like, for example, when you are sitting and you want to think clearly, right? You want to be able to what? Hear your thoughts. When someone disturbs you or speaks loud, you say, I can't hear myself think. I cannot hear myself think. That's a type of hearing, but it's without the ear, right? Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala hears, and his hearing is not like the hearing of the creation. If we've just mentioned that there is a type of hearing even in the creation that doesn't require an ear, okay, then it is much easier for a person then to understand that the hearing of Allah is nothing like the hearing of the creation. And also the seeing of Allah, for Allah to see, this seeing is without an eye, without a need for light rays and so on. This seeing is not like the seeing of the creation, especially when even in the creation a person could see things, see dreams, imagine their thoughts and things like that, even without an eye. So Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, his seeing is not like the seeing of the creation. He sees absolutely everything. The opposite of seeing and hearing, of course, is to be blind and to be deaf. To attribute these opposites to Allah, blasphemy, is an insult to Allah. Likewise, all the other attributes that we've mentioned so far. To attribute their opposites to Allah, this is an insult to Allah. This is a defect and hence an insult to Allah. Anyone who insults Allah is not a Muslim, hasn't believed, doesn't have that faith that is accepted by Allah Ta'ala. They have a deficiency. They are not said to have al-Iman, the proper belief. The next attribute, coming towards the end now, is al-Hayat. Allah revealed, rather the author said, wal-Hayat, or al-Hayah, أي أن الله حي بحياة أزلية أبدية ليست بروح ولحم ودم. قال الله تعالى الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم. Allah is attributed with life. What's the opposite of life? Death. So as well as Allah being attributed with existence, the opposite of which is non-existence, Allah is also, on top of that, Allah is attributed with life, right? The opposite of which is death. So this life of Allah, if someone asks you, okay, why? Okay, we say Allah is alive. We say Allah exists, right? You say yes. Then if a person asks, well, okay, we also say He's alive. We say yes. Someone asks, okay, why do we say he is alive? What's the intellectual proof for saying that on top of existing, he's actually alive? And to say that he's dead, this is insulting him. Explain that. The answer is, look, we have to say Allah is attributed with life. The reason is because the thing that is dead, you cannot attribute to it hearing, sight, knowledge, will, and power. Isn't it that we attribute seeing, hearing, knowledge, will, and power to Allah? The answer is yes. Okay. If someone said Allah is dead, someone said Allah is not alive, then they'd also be saying Allah is blind, deaf, forced, ignorant, and weak. So, in order for us to be able to attribute these five attributes to Allah, being hearing, seeing, knowledgeable, uh, powerful, and willing, in order for us to be able to attribute all these to Allah, we have to say that Allah is alive. Because the thing that is dead is not attributed with those five attributes. Think about a corpse, a person. Can you say, imagine the person was alive? You could say about them, oh, they want some water, right? This is will. Or they are able to sit up. Or yes, they know or they don't know. They know you're here. They can see you. They can hear you. Okay. Imagine 20 minutes later, this person passes. Now, would it be valid to say about this dead person that they are able? No, it's not. Or could we say about them that they are willing, they want such and such? No. Or that they can see or hear or that, and so on? No. So, like this, we have to say about Allah that He is alive. And by that, this authenticates, validates for us to say about Allah that He uh, has hearing, seeing, knowledge, will, and power. So, Allah, His life is not like our life. We are alive because we have souls in our bodies. And this is just the way Allah created it. But life doesn't always require a soul. This is just the way Allah made it, the norm for us. Isn't it that Allah revealed in the Quran that there are stones in which there is perception? There are stones in which fear is created. And because of that, these stones, these rocks, from the tops of mountains, they roll down. They crumble and they roll down from the tops of mountains because Allah creates perception within them. It's not because they have souls, but for humans, jinn, and animals, Allah made it be that they would be alive with souls. As for Allah, Allah is the creator of souls. Allah Ta'ala is not attributed with having a soul. So His life is without a soul. Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. The life of Allah is without flesh and blood. Rather, flesh, blood, and soul is what Allah created for us to be alive. As for Allah, He is alive without that. And the 12th attribute, or the number 12 of 13, Allah is attributed with an attribute that is known as Al-Kalam. This attribute, like all the attributes of Allah, is without a beginning and without an end. It is not a language, because all the languages are created. It is not made up of letters, because letters have shapes, sizes, beginnings, and ends. And it is not a sound, because sounds are low pitched, they're high pitched, they're deep, they're intermittent, they start and they stop. Allah has an attribute, which is the attribute by which Allah conveys to the creations what is prohibited and what is obligatory. This attribute is known as the Kalam of Allah. It can also be referred to in English as the speech of Allah. But remember, it's not a sound. Sounds are creations. It's not a language. It's not valid. It's not permissible. for a person to say Allah speaks English, وَالْعِيَاذُ billah, or that Allah speaks Arabic or Hebrew or German and so on. Because this is creation. So Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is attributed with al-kalam. The author said, وَالْكَلام أي أنه سبحانه وتعالى متكلم بكلام واحد أزلي أبدي ليس حرفا ولا صوتا ولا لغة قال الله تعالى وكلم الله موسى تكليما. Al-Kalam, or the speech of Allah, i.e. Allah the Exalted, who is not like the creation, speaks with one speech that is eternal without a beginning and everlasting. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable. It's not made up of letters, sounds, or a language. It is not a language. Languages have beginnings. Allah revealed that Allah Ta'ala gave Musa alayhi salam the ability to understand certain things from the kalam of Allah. This proves that Allah has kalam. Finally, Allah revealed, as is going to be mentioned in the ayah, but I'll say what the author said first. The author said, وَالْمُخَالَفَةُ لِلْحَوَادِثِ أي جميع المخلوقات أي أنه لا يشبه شيئا من خلقه قال الله تعالى ليس كمثله شيء. Allah is not like the creation. This is one of his attributes. He is dissimilar to the creations. He does not resemble the creations in any way whatsoever. The greatness of Allah is in the fact that He is not like anything. He is not like the creation. Okay? So He is not like the creation in any way whatsoever. Allah revealed, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, which means that Allah Ta'ala is nothing like the creation. Allah is nothing like the creation. So anybody who says Allah is like the creation or doubts, is Allah like this creation or not, this person commits blasphemy. So in order for a person to understand this last attribute very, very well, they would need to study the creation in brief. They would need to know what the creation is made up of. Shapes, sizes, dimensions, extremities, weight, and other measurements, colors, textures. All of this is to be like the creation. Being in a place, being bound by time, having seconds, minutes, as well as hours, days, weeks, months, years pass over a person. The passing of time, the elapsing of time, this is something Allah created. So it cannot be attributed to Allah. Mobility and immobility, these are things Allah created. So you can't say about Allah that He is still or that He moves. You can't say either about Allah. You can't say Allah is connected or disconnected. That Allah is hide or separated. You can't say that Allah becomes angry or is joyous or elated, because these are emotions, and emotions are creations of Allah. So this, once a person understands what creation is and how vast it is, it becomes easier then for them to negate the created attributes from Allah. Anybody who believes, for example, that Allah is in the sky, they are not worshipping Allah. They are worshipping something that they call Allah. Such a person is actually insulting Allah, even if they don't see that they are insulting Allah, because this person is attributing to Allah what does not befit him, which is being in a place, which is being like the creation. And Allah revealed in the Quran, لا تشركوا بالله شيئا. Don't attribute attributes of the creation to Allah. Don't say Allah is like the creation. If had Allah been like the creation, had Allah been in a place, then this thing that is in a place that some people call Allah, why would it deserve more? Why would it worship more than you? You are also in a place. And this thing that they call Allah is also in a place. Why would it deserve or be more deserving of worship than you when you share this attribute with it? Likewise, we don't say about Allah that He has a face or hands or that He walks. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Walking is an attribute of the creation. Instead, we say Allah is nothing like the creation. Absolutely nothing like the creation. مهما تصورت ببالك فالله بخلاف ذلك. Whatever you can imagine in your mind, Allah is not like that. Allah is unimaginable. So you cannot say about Allah that He is in the sky or that He is attributed with emotions and so on, like we mentioned. Instead, we say Allah exists just as He always has, without being bound by time, without being confined to one place or being in every place. Being like the creation is impossible. And for Allah to be like the creation is an impossibility. So this is the first step for anybody who wants to do the good deeds, and for them to be accepted, they first need to have the correct belief about Allah. They first need to have the correct belief about Allah. Even if a person outwardly seemed like a good person, they donated to the poor, they helped the orphans, they aided the widowed women, they built shelters, and so on. If such a person, despite them doing all of these outwardly good deeds, because they were not a Muslim, they will not have any reward for these good deeds in the hereafter. They will have nothing in the hereafter except sins. So the first step that a person should worry about and should make sure that they know well is to learn the correct belief in Allah. Because if that's not correct, then nothing else matters. Performing the shape of the prayer, going to Al-Hajj, none of that matters. So this is a very, very important topic that should be reviewed regularly, about the attributes of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Okay, we'll stop here today, inshallah ta'ala. Let us say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Just a reminder that the recordings of the sessions can be found on the YouTube channel. Just wait for a couple of days. Usually it takes a couple of days for them to go on there, removing any slips of the tongue and so on, so that it's so that the best version, let's say, is on there. So if you feel that you need to review or you miss something, then please do refer to what's inshallah on the Prosperity Publications YouTube channel. Okay. Barakallahu bikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة